The Scarlet Letter, Dimmesdale Under Fire. That's right, our very own Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale is on trial for being the darkest sinner of Puritan Boston. All right, enough with the cheesy music, Carlson. Sorry about that. The mock trial will take place Monday, November 21st. So that is the Monday before finals. Now, I know you already have a lot on your plate, but you won't actually even know your role until Friday, November 21st. So this is just a forewarning of what is to come so that when we do draw roles on the 21st, you know exactly what's to be expected of you. Essentially, the aim of the trial is to figure out, is Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale the character with the darkest sin? All of the characters in the Scarlet Letter are racked with sin to different degrees, but is Dimmesdale the greatest of them all? In the mock trial, students will take on various roles, whether they be prosecution, defense, witness, judge, or even jury. Basically, the text itself is going to be where you develop all of your evidence and your position. However, inferences can be made. As I said before, student roles will be decided November 21st. We're going to draw at random. Now, if you get a role that you do not like, you may trade with other students. However, no student will receive preference. And each role will be given equal work. Now, some of them will be more presentational in nature than others. Okay, let's go over the roles themselves. We've got the prosecution team and the defense team, which are essentially the same. The prosecution is trying to prove Dimmesdale's guilt, that he is in fact the darkest sinner. One person will be in charge of the opening remarks. There'll be roughly 3 people in charge of questioning the witnesses, 1 person in charge of cross-examining, and then 1 person who gives the closing remarks. Now, those roles are essentially the same on the defense team. However, the goal is the opposite, to prove the innocence of Dimmesdale as the darkest sinner. The prosecution team has 3 witnesses. Those witnesses' jobs is to prove, again, the guilt of Dimmesdale. Now, Dimmesdale himself will be interviewed as a witness. We know that Dimmesdale is racked with guilt. We discussed the bloody scourge in class and his internalization that became externalized. The goal in examining all of these, whether it be Dimmesdale, Chillingworth, or Mistress Hibbins, is to point them to various references within the text that highlight his guilt. The defense witnesses are Dimmesdale, Hester, and Pearl. Now, the student who plays Dimmesdale for the defense will be different than the student who plays Dimmesdale for the prosecution, just to make everything even. Dimmesdale is on both sides because we know Dimmesdale kind of goes back and forth between his guilt. At moments he is running wickedly through the town, and other moments he has great repentance and remorse. We also will have a jury. The jury will vary in size depending on the class, so look to your instructor for that size. The jury will be an attentive audience for both sides of the argument and will evaluate the arguments presented in order to determine a verdict. Each juror will develop his or her own verdict, and then eventually all the jurors will deliberate together. We will also have a judge, or perhaps multiple judges depending on the size of the class. The judge is in charge of running the trial. He or she will monitor the trial agenda, keeping all parties on track for timing. Also, the judge will make sure that the prosecution and the defense do not go off on any tangents. They stay on the task at hand and only bring up evidence that is relevant. The judge, although not in charge of the verdict, will also create a verdict of his or her own and will provide evidence for that and will guide the jury in deliberating. The trial agenda is as follows. We will start with opening statements from both the prosecution and defense, where they will state their thesis and summarize what is to come. For about 15 minutes, the prosecution will examine its witnesses. The time allotment is holistic, so if you want to interview Dimmesdale for 10 of those 15, that's perfectly fine. You just will need to interview all 3. Now, after the witnesses have testified for the prosecution, the defense will get about 2 minutes to cross-examine. Now, 2 minutes is not a whole lot of time, so it might be a good idea to focus in on one particular character. This cross-examination functions like a counter-argument. So the goal would be to point out any flaws in the logic presented, point out any holes, or introduce any information that was omitted from the prosecution side. After that cross-examination, the defense will have an opportunity to examine its witnesses. Then the prosecution will cross-examine for 2 minutes, and then there will be the closing statements on both sides. The closing statements will summarize the arguments presented and remind the jury of the original thesis. The closing statement, kind of like the conclusion of an essay, is really meant to captivate the audience and give that final emphatic punch. So the strength of the prose is just as important as the strength of the presentation. Now, due to the time allotment, the jury will deliberate actually overnight. So that Monday night, the jury will individually figure out what his or her own verdict would be. And then the following day, whether that's Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on the day you have your final, the jurors will discuss for 10 to 15 minutes, come up with a conclusive verdict, and will announce their verdict at the end of the class. So the very last thing we'll do is figure out, is he guilty or is he innocent? All of this information will be provided to you electronically from your instructor, so make sure you know where to access all that information. Likewise, rubrics for specific roles will be forthcoming, as well as the point attributions for each component of the project. We hope that you have a lot of fun with this activity. We hope that it furthers your understanding of the text. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us in class or via email. Thanks and good luck.